The fluorescent lights hummed softly in the nearly deserted underground parking garage. It was past midnight, and Elena hurried toward her car after a long shift at the hospital. Her footsteps echoed against concrete pillars, accompanied only by the distant drip of water seeping through the structure. She fished in her purse for her keys, eager to get home, when a faint groan made her stop in her tracks. Elena's heart kicked with alarm. She turned slowly, scanning the rows of parked cars. Was someone hurt? The groan came again, low and pain-laced, echoing off concrete walls. In the murky half-light, she spotted a figure slumped against the wheel of a dark luxury sedan, a few aisles over from her own car. For a moment, caution rooted her in place. The city wasn't safe these days, especially at night, but the moan rose a second time, more desperate, and Elena's instincts honed. By years of medical training and an innate compassion overrode her fear. She approached cautiously. A man in a navy blue suit lay half-propped against the car's tire. Under the harsh garage lighting, his face appeared ashen and damp with sweat. Elena's gaze dropped to his torso, where his white shirt was blossoming with a dark, wet stain, blood. A lot of it, her breath caught. Without hesitation, she dropped to her knees at his side. Sir, can you hear me?" she asked urgently, placing a hand on his shoulder. The fabric of his suit jacket was slick where her fingers brushed near the wound. He let out a ragged breath, eyelids fluttering. A closer look revealed a neat bullet hole on his left side, just below his ribs. It looked like a gunshot wound. Elena had seen wounds like this during trauma rotations at the hospital, but never out in the real world, alone. This was no ordinary accident. Elena's hands were already moving, tearing open his jacket and pressing it aside to assess the injury. Blood was streaming from the small, ragged wound. She had to act quickly. With one hand, she yanked a clean handkerchief from her purse and pressed it hard against the wound, trying to stanch the bleeding. Her other hand fumbled for her phone. He needed an ambulance immediately. At the click of her phone screen lighting up, the man's eyes snapped open with startling intensity, faster than she would have thought possible for someone so wounded. His hand shot out and grabbed her wrist. Elena gasped as his fingers clamped down, smearing blood on her skin. No police," he choked out. His voice was hoarse but commanding, each word an effort. Dark, pain-clouded eyes bore into hers. "Please, no cops." Elena hesitated, phone hovering in her hand. "But you need an ambulance," she urged, keeping pressure on his wound. He grimaced, shaking his head weakly. "No, hospital," he managed. "They'll finish the job." His hand on her wrist trembled with strain, but his grip remained surprisingly strong. Whoever he feared, it scared him more than bleeding out here in the dark. She didn't understand why he was so terrified of the authorities, but he was fading fast. Focus, Elena, she told herself. If calling 911 might put him in more danger, she wouldn't do it, not when a life hung in the balance. Elena swallowed hard and nodded, making a split-second decision. "All right," she murmured. "No police, for now." Instead, she repositioned herself and pressed down firmly on the wound. The man sagged in relief that she'd listened. His head lolled back against the tire rim, eyes unfocused. "Stay with me," Elena urged. She shrugged off her light jacket, wadded it up, and pressed it to his side to slow the bleeding. Her fingers were slick with his blood, her pulse racing. He was fading. She had to do something, but all alone here, what? She considered screaming for help, but at this hour, who would hear? Her car was the only one left on this level, or so she thought. Suddenly, the quiet whine of engines echoed through the garage. Elena's head jerked up as two black SUVs tore down the ramp and screeched to a halt nearby, headlights slicing through the gloom. For one hopeful instant, she thought help had arrived, until doors flew open, and men in dark suits poured out, guns drawn. "Spread out!" one of them barked, the order echoing off the concrete. They moved with chilling military precision, as if expecting an ambush. Elena's blood turned to ice. Who are these people? She shrank back instinctively, ducking behind a concrete pillar a few yards away. In her haste, she slipped away from the wounded man. Her jacket stayed pressed against his wound, held in place by his slumped body. Elena hoped desperately that the makeshift bandage would hold. Within seconds, the men converged on the fallen stranger. "Marco!" one of them exclaimed in a choked voice as he knelt beside the unconscious man. Two others kept their weapons aloft, circling warily. They clearly knew this man, and judging by their urgent, panicked movements, He was someone important. One man, likely the leader, inspected the wound and the blood-soaked jacket pressed there. He glanced around sharply. "Someone was here," he snapped. "He's been given first aid." His tone carried both relief and confusion. Elena shrank further behind the pillar, heart hammering. Before they could search further, the leader barked. "We need to get him out of here now. The cops will be on their way." He gestured, and two of the men lifted the unconscious stranger by his shoulders and legs with practiced care. Elena watched, biting her lip. Who is this Marco, and what had she stumbled into? These men were clearly not ordinary good. Samaritans, they moved with ruthless purpose. Her common sense screamed at her to stay hidden. If they found her, would she be in danger? The men carried Marco to one of the SUVs. Just before they loaded him in, one noticed Elena's crumpled jacket pressed to Marco's side. He tossed the makeshift bandage aside and replaced it with his own hand to maintain pressure on the wound as they lifted him. In a matter of moments, they had him inside. The SUV's doors slammed. Engines revved, and with a screech of tires, both vehicles sped off into the night as abruptly as they'd arrived. Silence crashed back into the garage. Elena slowly stepped out from behind the pillar, legs trembling. Her jacket lay abandoned on the oil-stained concrete, drenched in blood that wasn't hers. She realized her hands were shaking, stained red to the wrists. What just happened? She thought, adrenaline roaring in her ears. She had stumbled upon a bleeding man, saved his life with her bare hands, and then watched a squad of dangerous-looking men whisk him away without so much as a thank you or explanation. She stood there for a long moment, chest heaving, trying to calm down. It felt like the start of a nightmare, not real life. Finally, Elena forced herself to move. She wiped her bloody palms on her scrub pants, grabbed her phone, still open to the emergency dial screen, and her purse, and backed away toward her car. As she climbed into the driver's seat with unsteady hands, Elena couldn't shake the image of that stranger's face, the desperation in his eyes as he begged her not to call for help, the way he'd clung to her as if her presence alone could save him. Whoever he was, whatever trouble he was in, she had been the one to find him. And she had saved his life. She shuddered, wondering if she'd just made a terrible mistake or a fateful choice. Either way, one thing was certain. A simple act of compassion tonight had dragged Elena into something far beyond her world. She had saved a stranger, and she had no idea he was the most feared Mafia boss, a man who would never let her go. Sunlight streamed through the thin curtains of Elena's small apartment bedroom. When her alarm blared, she woke with a start, heart pounding, images of last night's parking garage ordeal flashing through her mind. For a disoriented moment, she wasn't sure if it had been real or just a terrible dream, but the dried streak of blood she noticed under her fingernails told the truth. It had happened. Elena swallowed down the lingering anxiety and forced herself out of bed. It was already past 7, and she could hear her brother Nico clattering dishes in the kitchen. She was supposed to have been up an hour ago to make him breakfast before school. "You're up!" Nico's surprised voice greeted her as she hurried into the kitchen, still pulling her dark hair into a ponytail. The teenager stood at the counter in his rumpled school uniform, poking at a bowl of cereal. "I was about to leave without saying bye. You slept in." "I know, I'm sorry," Elena said, guilt threading her voice. She quickly poured herself some coffee, hoping it would jolt her fully awake. She placed a gentle hand on Nico's shoulder. "I got home really late last night." Nico peered at her with concern. At 16, he was tall and gangly, all elbows and knees, but with a sweetness in his eyes that reminded Elena of their late mother. "Another double shift?" he asked, frowning. Elena hesitated. She hated lying, but what could she even tell him about last night? "Something like that," she replied softly. It wasn't exactly a lie. She had worked, and then some unexpected overtime saving a life in a parking garage. "I'm fine, though." She mustered a reassuring smile. Nico didn't look convinced. "You work too hard," he mumbled, going back to stirring his cereal. "And you look really tired, you know." "Hey," Elena nudged him lightly. "Don't you worry about me. I'm making sure we're okay, right? 1 more year and you'll be off to college, and I can take a breather." She tried to keep the mood light, though her chest tightened at the thought of Nico leaving. He was her only family now. Nico sighed and gave her a sideways look. "I can get a part-time job? Help with the bills?" "Absolutely not," Elena cut him off. more sharply than intended. She softened her tone. Your job is to focus on school. I've got the rest handled, promise. He nodded, though concern still clouded his expression. Just be careful, okay? I heard on the news last night there was some shooting downtown. It sounded bad. City's been getting crazy. Elena's stomach flipped. A shooting downtown. Could that have been Marco's incident? She hadn't checked the news, but of course there would be reports. Keeping her face neutral, she ruffled Nico's hair. Don't worry about me. I'm always careful. Moments later, she saw Nico off to catch his bus, and then got ready for her own day. Elena's life allowed no rest. Even on days away from the hospital, she had classes for her physician's assistant program. Today was a shorter shift at the clinic, followed by an afternoon lecture. She dressed in fresh scrubs and stepped outside into the crisp morning, determined to push last night's mystery from her mind and concentrate on her responsibilities. Later that day, Elena's sneakers squeaked on the polished linoleum as she briskly walked the halls of St. Catherine's Clinic. The familiar scent of antiseptic and the hum of activity helped ground her back in reality. She had spent the morning assisting with routine checkups and tending to patients with everyday complaints, sore throats, sprained ankles, the normalcy of it a stark contrast to the blood-soaked drama of the night before. Elena, you okay? A warm voice asked as she stepped into the staff lounge for a quick lunch break. It was Mia, a fellow intern and her closest friend at work. Mia was stirring sugar into a paper cup of tea, her eyes flicking with concern over Elena's tired face. Elena managed a smile. I'm fine. Just didn't sleep. Well, she grabbed a yogurt from the fridge and sank into a chair. Her hands still felt stiff, and she had to resist the urge to keep checking them for phantom bloodstains. Mia sat across from her. I'm not surprised. We were here late and you left even later than me. You should have called an Uber, instead of walking to the garage alone. She chided gently. You know how our city's been lately. Elena took a sip of coffee from her thermos, its bitterness snapping her into focus. I didn't want to bother anyone, and I was fine. Just took me a while to get to my car. She hoped Mia couldn't hear the slight tremor in her voice at that understatement. As if on cue, the small television mounted in the corner of the lounge switched to a breaking news segment. Overnight violence continues, the announcer was saying. Both women turned to look. Grainy footage of police cars and caution tape outside a parking structure flashed on screen. Police responded to reports of gunfire in Midtown late last night, the reporter said. At the scene, authorities found blood and signs of a possible victim, but no one was there when they arrived. It's believed to be connected to ongoing clashes between rival, organized crime groups in the city. This incident marks the third shootout this week, and police are warning citizens to exercise caution. Elena felt the color drain from her face. That had to be the garage where she'd found Marco. Her hand tightened around her coffee cup. Mia grimaced. Another gang shooting? It's getting too close to home. Was that near the hospital? It might have been, Elena replied carefully. She recognized the street name on the TV ticker. It was indeed just a few blocks from the clinic's parking garage. Mia gave a low whistle. Geez, you must have missed it by a hair. I left before midnight and didn't hear anything. Thank God you weren't caught up in it. Elena forced a tight smile and concentrated on peeling the lid off her yogurt to avoid Mia's eyes. Yeah, lucky me. She could hardly breathe. Her mind was racing. So the police did come, but not in time to find Marco or her. They must have found her jacket and the blood. Did they have any idea what happened? Was Marco's disappearance noted? And organized crime? Did that mean he was part of the Mafia? Mia reached over and squeezed Elena's arm sympathetically. Seriously, you need to be careful. I worry about you going to that garage by yourself. Next time, call me or security to walk you, okay? Elena took a deep breath and nodded. Okay, I will. She appreciated Mia's concern, but if only her friend knew just how crazy last night had gotten. Mia stood, tossing her tea stirrer in the trash. All right, I've got to get back to the front desk. Early clinic hours mean early lunch. She paused, then wagged a finger. Don't stay too late tonight, Elena, promise? Elena mustered a more genuine smile this time. Promise. I'll be out of here before dark. As her friend left, Elena exhaled slowly. End of shift or not, she planned to swing by the library for a bit before heading home to study. She hoped a crowded campus library would distract her from replaying the terrifying events in her head. It was dusk by the time Elena finally left the university library, arms full of textbooks. True to her word, she'd left the clinic before nightfall, but studying had kept her later on campus. Stepping into the cooling evening air, she balanced her books on one hip and dug out her car keys. The day's normal routine had kept her busy, yet the unanswered questions about Marco lurked at the back of her mind. Who exactly had she saved? And what would happen if his people found out her identity? She shook the thoughts away as she reached her car in the student lot. Worrying wouldn't help. She had done the right thing helping an injured man, whatever the consequences. Elena would have to face them. It was simply in her nature to help, and she couldn't regret that. As she unlocked her beat-up sedan and tossed her books in, Elena remembered Mia's parting warning. The news report still echoed in her ears. But Elena squared her shoulders. She refused to live in fear. People needed her, at the hospital and at home. She'd keep doing what she had to do. That resolve carried her as she drove home under the orange glow of streetlights, unaware that decisions were already being set in, motioned by dangerous men decisions that would soon upend her ordinary world forever. True to her word, Elena made it home early that evening, but relaxation proved impossible. As night fell, the weight of what she'd experienced pressed down on her. Finally, unable to bear it alone, she picked up her phone and called the one person she trusted completely. Half an hour later, Mia arrived at Elena's apartment with 2 cups of steaming hot chocolate and a bag of pastries. "All right, spill," Mia said without preamble, handing Elena a cup. They settled on the worn couch in the living room, the TV low in the background. Nico was holed up in his room with homework and headphones, leaving the young women privacy. Elena took a deep breath, both hands wrapped around the warm mug. She had debated all afternoon how much to tell, but the moment she saw Mia's concerned face, the story came tumbling out. She described leaving the clinic late, hearing the groan in the parking garage, finding the wounded man, the desperate plea not to call the police, and the chilling arrival of armed men. Mia listened with eyes growing wider by the second. By the time Elena finished, Mia was gaping at her. "Oh my God," she breathed. "Elena, you realize what this sounds like, right?" Elena managed a shaky laugh. "A nightmare?" "I was going to say an action movie," Mia replied, though her attempt at levity couldn't hide her nervousness. She set her untouched hot chocolate on the coffee table. "This is insane." "You're lucky to be alive," Elena exhaled slowly. Now that she'd voiced it aloud, the whole incident felt even more surreal. She stared down at the swirls of marshmallow in her mug. "I keep thinking, what if I hadn't been there? Would he have just bled out alone?" "Maybe," Mia said softly. "But thank God you were. You probably saved his life." They sat in silence for a moment, the enormity of it hanging between them. On the TV, an old sitcom laugh track played, jarringly out of place. Mia cleared her throat. "So this guy Marco, and those men who took him, what do you think that was all about? Some kind of gang thing?" Elena chewed her lip. "The news said it was likely organized crime. Mafia." She whispered the last word, as if afraid the walls might hear. Mia's eyebrows shot up. "Mafia? Like actual mafia? You think he's mixed up in that?" "I don't know. The way those men acted, it was like something out of a mob film, and he begged me not to involve the police." Elena shivered at the memory of Marco's blood-stained hand gripping her wrist. He was terrified of them. "Coming," Mia pulled a throw. Blanket from the back of the couch around both of their shoulders. "Holy hell, Elena. If he's mafia, that means the people who took him were, too." She lowered her voice. "Do you think they saw you?" Elena shook her head. "I hid. I don't think they got a good look. I left my jacket, though." She winced. "It was covered in his blood, so I didn't grab it." Mia cringed. "Ew. Well, even if they found it, they'd just know someone helped him, right? They wouldn't know who." Right. Elena hoped that was true. She had parked in that garage, though. Her car had been the only other one around. If they remembered the car, but no, why would they care about her? They had their boss, presumably, and rushed off. Mia looked at her seriously. "Elena, do you think you should, I don't know, tell someone about this? The police, maybe?" Elena's stomach tightened. She had considered it, of course. But the memory of Marco's panicked plea made her shake her head. "He begged me not to. And if he is mafia, going to the police could be dangerous. For me and for Nico. I don't want to get us tangled up in whatever this is." Besides, the cops already know something went down from that news report. If they need me, they'll find me. She wasn't entirely sure that was true, but it made her feel better to say it. Mia nodded slowly. Then I guess we just pretend it never happened? I mean, you did a good deed and walked away. Maybe that's the end of it. Elena forced a smile. Maybe. She wished she could believe that. But a gnawing feeling in her gut told her this wasn't over so neatly. Mia tried to lighten the mood. Listen, if some handsome stranger in a suit sweeps you off to a private mansion as thanks, do I get your apartment? She gave a wry grin. It was an outrageous scenario, clearly meant as a joke. Elena snorted. No one's coming to sweep me off anywhere. And even if they did, I'd fight them every step. She flexed her fingers in mock menace, and Mia laughed, easing the tension slightly. Before long, Mia had to head home. The two friends hugged tightly at the door. Lock up and stay safe, Mia urged, worry creasing her brow again. Call me if you need anything, promise. I promise, Elena said, holding the door as Mia walked down the hallway. She double-locked it after, then leaned against the wood, exhaling. Talking it through had helped, but she could still feel unseen eyes on her, as if the shadows themselves carried threats. She tried to shake it off and went to check on Nico before bed. Across town, inside a dim surveillance control room, two men in suits watched a grainy black and white video feed on a monitor. The timestamp read the previous night, and the camera angle showed the entrance ramp of a parking garage. On the screen, a lone car drove out into the night. There, pause it, one man said, leaning forward. The video froze, capturing the sedan's license plate as clear as day. He smirked. Gotcha. A few keystrokes later, the plate number and registry information popped up in a search window. It listed Elena Cabrera, along with her address. The second man pulled out his phone. Mr. DeLuca will want to see this, he said quietly, snapping a photo of the screen and firing off a message. His partner nodded, eyes still on the paused image of Elena's car and the faint outline of her figure in the driver's seat. Find the girl who saved the boss. That's the order. Looks like we just did. With that, the two men exchanged satisfied glances. In the next room, a phone buzzed in the hands of a recovering but furious Mafia kingpin, and Elena's fate began to close in around her, though she remained blissfully unaware of the storm about to break upon her world. The penthouse bedroom was dark, save for the faint city lights filtering through floor-to-ceiling windows. Marco DeLuca awoke with a sharp intake of breath as pain flared hot and bright in his left side. Instinctively, his hand flew to the bandaged wound just below his ribs. His fingers met a thick layer of gauze and the unmistakable tenderness of healing flesh. He cursed under his breath in Italian and tried to sit up. Immediately, a firm hand pressed him back against the silk pillows. Easy, boss, came a low voice. Stefano, his personal lieutenant, leaned into view. Stefano's usually impassive face betrayed relief. You're okay. Try not to move too fast. Marco gritted his teeth. His head swam from either blood loss or the tail end of anesthesia. Memories came rushing back and disjointed. Flashes. The squeal of tires as his enemies boxed in his car. The crack of gunfire. Searing pain. And then much later, soft hands pressing on his wound and a steady voice telling him he was going to be all right. A voice that wasn't Stefano's or any of his men's. The girl, Marco rasped. His throat felt like sandpaper. He accepted the glass of water. Stefano quickly held to his lips and drank in small gulps. The girl in the garage. Where is she? Stefano exchanged a glance with someone out of Marco's view. Stepping forward from the shadows of the opulent bedroom was Matteo DeLuca, Marco's younger brother and second in command. Matteo's dark hair was slicked back, and worry lines creased his forehead, though whether they were genuine or for show, Marco could never entirely tell. The two brothers were alike in their strong jaw and sharp eyes, but where Marco's gaze was often fierce, Matteo's held a calculating gleam. We're looking for her, Matteo said, spreading his hands in a placating gesture. I have men investigating. You were half dead when we got to you. Whoever tended your wound kept you alive, at least long enough for our doctor to stabilize you. Marco's eyes narrowed. He tried once more to push himself upright, and this time Stefano helped prop him up against a mound of pillows. Pain lanced through his torso, but he ignored it. I remember her, he said quietly, his tone brooking no argument. She saved my life, Matteo nodded. And we're grateful, of course. But you have to be careful, Marco. For all we know, that woman could be connected to the ambush. She might have been sent to— No! Marco's voice was cold steel. She was scared out of her mind. Those bastards nearly killed me, and she stepped in when no one else was there. His brow furrowed as fragments of the memory sharpened. The woman's face hovering above him, her eyes wide with concern, the way she'd spoken calmly, trying to keep him conscious. He recalled how gentle her touch had been despite the chaos. A stranger, just a girl coming to her car, had had the courage to help him. She could have run away, Marco murmured almost to himself. But she didn't. Stefano gave a half smile. Lucky for you, boss. Not many would do that. Marco's chest tightened, not entirely from the pain of his injury. In his line of work, selflessness was a rarity. People who wanted nothing in return didn't exist in his world. Yet that girl, whoever she was, had knelt in blood to save a stranger. Save him. He needed to know more. He fixed Matteo with a hard stare. I want her found immediately. Matteo cleared his throat. About that, we might have a lead. He reached into his suit jacket and pulled out his phone, swiping to open an image that had arrived moments ago. He held it out to Marco. It showed a fuzzy still from a security camera. A young woman with dark hair driving out of a garage, her face not fully clear but the car's license plates legible. Next to it was her information, pulled from the registry. Marco snatched the phone, scanning it quickly. Elena Cabrera, 24, student employed at St. Catherine's Clinic. An address not far from downtown. He felt a surge of satisfaction. Elena. So that was her name. Stefano peered over his shoulder and let out a soft chuckle. Well, that answers that. Marco's lips curved in a grim semblance of a smile. Efficient as always, his men wasted no time. He locked eyes with his brother. Bring her to me. But hear me, Matteo, no one hurts her. Not a hair on her head. Matteo inclined his head slowly. Of course, though, what if she won't come? If she panics? We can't exactly ask politely at gunpoint and expect her to cooperate. I don't care how— You do it, Marco said, his voice quiet but lethal. As long as she's safe and unharmed. Make up a story if you must, but do not frighten her more than necessary. There was a tension in the room beyond. Marco's words. Stefano busied himself checking the IV drip beside the bed, but Matteo held his brother's gaze with a flicker of something unreadable. Finally, Matteo gave a thin smile. Understood. I'll see to it personally. As Matteo slipped his phone away, Marco could not shake the feeling that his brother's acquiescence was a bit too smooth. But he had other concerns now. He waved a dismissive hand. Go, and Matteo, no delays. Matteo nodded and left the room, already barking orders at someone on his way out. The door closed, leaving Marco with Stefano and the soft beep of medical monitors. Marco exhaled, allowing a moment of weakness now that only Stefano remained. Pain pulsed in his side and he grimaced. Status report, he grunted. How bad did we get hit? Stefano's expression darkened. Bad. It was an ambush. 3 of our vehicles were decoys. They drew you out exactly like they planned. We lost 4 men. The attackers vanished before our backup team arrived. It looked like an inside tip, boss. Marco's jaw clenched. An inside betrayal. He had suspected as much. How else could they have known his route? Fury simmered beneath his ribs, but he forced himself calm. We'll deal with that later, he muttered. First, Elena. He tried her name on his tongue. It felt oddly soothing in his mouth. A counterpoint to the anger. She risked herself for me. I owe her a debt. Stefano raised a brow. Dead or not, it was obvious to him that Marco's interest in this girl ran deeper than mere obligation, but he simply nodded. We'll bring her in safely. Marco gingerly lay back against the pillows, eyes sliding to the window where dawn's first light was creeping in. The city skyline was painted in pale gray. His body ached and his pride even more so, being laid up in bed, nearly killed by rivals. But amid the humiliation and rage, one thought steadied him. Elena's face, leaning over him with concern instead of indifference. He would see her again soon. And this time, he would not be a half-conscious victim at her feet, but awake and in control, whatever it took. Marco intended to ensure that the woman who saved his life would be protected. And kept close. 3 days passed in a tense blur for Elena. Each night she triple-checked the locks and peered. Through her apartment, windows at every headlight's flash, fearing that the mysterious events in the garage might circle back to her. But nothing out of the ordinary happened. By the third day, she began to convince herself that perhaps Mia was right. Maybe her life could go back to normal. It was early evening on that third day when Elena left the clinic after an extended shift. The autumn sun had already set, leaving the streets bathed in inky blue shadows. Elena pulled her light jacket tighter and walked briskly toward the parking lot where her car awaited. Her feet ached, and her mind was on the leftover pasta she'd heat up for dinner and the exam she still needed to study for. Normal thoughts, she told herself. Just a normal night. "Excuse me, Miss Cabrera?" A male voice called out from behind her. Elena's shoulders tensed. She was just steps from her car. How did someone know her name? She turned and saw two tall men emerge from the far side of the lot, stepping out of the dimness between lamp posts. They were dressed in crisp suits and overcoats despite the casual setting, and everything about their deliberate approach set off alarm bells in Elena's head. She took a step back, glancing around. The lot was mostly empty at this hour. The nearest street lamp flickered as if on cue, casting erratic light over the strangers. "Yes?" Elena asked warily, her hand sliding into her pocket to grip her phone. One man, sandy-haired and with a polite smile, spoke first. "Forgive the intrusion. We were hoping to have a word with you." His colleague, a broader man with a shaven head, remained a pace behind, eyes alert and watchful. Elena's heart thudded. These men screamed Mafia without even trying. The expensive suits, the subtle bulge under their jackets that likely concealed firearms, the professional but unnerving demeanor. I'm actually in a hurry," she stammered, forcing a smile. "Maybe you could call the clinic for an appointment?" She edged closer to her car door, fumbling with her keys inside her pocket. The sandy-haired man raised his hands in a conciliatory gesture. "This isn't about the clinic. It's about Sunday night. The parking garage." Elena's stomach dropped. Instinctively, she turned on her heel and bolted. But she managed only 2 strides before the broad man moved with startling speed, sidestepping into her path. "Please, Miss Cabrera," the first man said sharply, dropping the pretense of a friendly chat. "Don't run. We're not here to hurt you." Elena's pulse pounded in her ears. She clutched her phone, thumb hovering over the emergency dial. "Who are you?" she demanded, breathless. "What do you want?" The sandy-haired man sighed as if inconvenienced. "My name is Victor, and this is Paul. We work for a man who owes you a debt of gratitude. He'd like to thank you in person." "Your boss?" Elena asked, though she already knew. Her mind flashed to the name she'd heard in the garage. Marco, the Mafia boss. Victor inclined his head. "Mr. DeLuca," he acknowledged. "He's very eager to meet the woman who saved his life." Elena swallowed, her mouth dry as ash. So it was true. Marco had found her, and he had sent his people. I appreciate the offer," she said carefully, trying to keep her voice steady. "But I really can't. I have to get home." Paul, the large one, crossed his arms. "We must insist." His tone was polite in a way that was somehow more terrifying than any shout. Elena glanced around again. There were no other people in sight. Even if she screamed, it was unlikely anyone would hear in time. "If you're grateful, you can tell him he's welcome," she tried, taking another step back. Her heel bumped into her car's tire. "There, message delivered. You can go." Victor's smile thinned. "I'm afraid we can't do that. We have orders to bring you to him, and Mr. DeLuca is not a man who likes to be kept waiting." Elena's fingers trembled around her phone. She could call 911 right now. But then what? A vision of Nico and Mia flashed in her mind. If this really was the Mafia, a phone call wouldn't protect her loved ones from potential retaliation. "If you refuse," Victor continued, his polite smile never wavering, "we'd hate to see your hard-earned career put in jeopardy by any unpleasantness. Mr. Dory, Luca has considerable influence with your hospital's board." The undertone was unmistakable. Refuse, and life as she knew it could collapse. A chill rippled through Elena. They knew about her job, her life. This was no spur-of-the-moment request. Marco's people had prepared leverage. He was essentially blackmailing her under the guise of politeness. Paul stepped a half-step closer, and Elena instinctively pressed her back against the car door. The 2 men loomed, though they kept a careful distance of a few feet. Victor softened his voice. "Come quietly with us. We'll take you to Mr. DeLuca's residence. You'll be returned home once he's expressed his thanks. That's all. Elena's mind raced. Did she even have a choice? If she went, she'd be at their mercy on his turf. If she refused, they'd ruin her life. Or worse, harm the people she loved. Her heart thundered. At least let me tell my brother so he won't worry, she pleaded. Victor gave her a pitying look. Already taken care of. We left a message with Nico that you're working an unexpected late shift. He won't worry. Elena's blood ran cold at the casual mention of Nico's name on this stranger's tongue. They had thought of everything. She realized then that she was well and truly trapped. Straightening her spine, Elena tried to summon some dignity, even as fear coiled in her stomach. All right, she said quietly. I'll come. Victor's tight smile returned. Smart decision. He opened the rear door of a sleek black sedan that Elena hadn't noticed parked a few yards away. Probably one of several lining the lot, ready and waiting. Elena drew in a shaky breath. With no other choice, she climbed inside. Paul closed the door gently behind her. Within seconds, the two men were in the front seats and the car pulled out of the lot. Gliding into the night, she sat rigid in the leather back seat, heart pounding out a panicked rhythm. The city lights blurred past the windows. Elena's mind spun scenarios of what awaited her at the end of this drive. Was Marco planning to kill her for knowing too much? But if that were the case, why all this courtesy and talk of gratitude? Perhaps he truly just wanted to thank her. Though this felt like a hell of a way to deliver thanks. After a tense, silent journey, the sedan turned down a long tree-lined driveway. Wrought iron gates opened smoothly, and Elena glimpsed a grand estate illuminated by warm lights against the dusk. The car rolled to a stop in front of a sprawling mansion of stone and glass. Elena's breath caught. It was the kind of home she'd only seen in luxury magazines or on TV, a Mafia boss's lair indeed. Her stomach did a flip as Victor opened her door and offered a hand to help her out. She ignored his hand and stepped out on her own, knees slightly shaky. The front doors of the mansion swung open and a tall figure emerged, backlit by the opulent glow of a chandelier. Marco De Luca cut an imposing silhouette, broad-shouldered in a tailored suit, one hand resting on a silver-topped cane. As he descended the steps, Elena could make out the pallor of his face, still recovering from blood, loss and a steely gaze fixed on her. This was the man whose life she had saved, the man who had effectively kidnapped her now. Elena? Marco greeted her as if they were old friends, his deep voice echoing in the still evening air. There was a subtle warmth in the way he said her name, almost gentle. Welcome, I'm so glad you came. Elena stood rooted to the gravel drive, fists clenched at her sides to hide their trembling. I wasn't exactly given a choice, she replied. Unable to keep the bite from her tone, Marco reached the bottom of the stairs and studied her. Regret flickered in his expression. I apologize for the forceful invitation. I had to ensure you'd hear me out. He took a careful step toward her, and instinctively Elena stepped back. She felt Paul's solid presence somewhere behind her. There'd be no easy escape. Marco stopped, respecting the distance, but his eyes never left her face. Please come inside. You must have 1,000 questions, and I have much to say to you. He extended, an arm in a gracious gesture toward the open doorway, where more of his men stood like sentinels. With no viable alternative, Elena lifted her chin and moved forward. The Mafia boss fell into step beside her, careful to keep a polite distance as though she truly were an honored guest and not a captive. Yet as Elena crossed the threshold into the mansion, heart hammering, she felt the invisible bars close around her. She was stepping into the lion's den now, one ruled by a predator who spoke softly and carried the weight of blood and power behind every word. Her mind raced with a single frantic thought. What have I gotten myself into? Elena sat perched on the edge of a velvet armchair in Marco's study, her nerves wound tight. The room was dimly lit by a crackling fireplace, the wood-paneled walls lined with leather-bound books and antique decor. It might have been cozy under different circumstances, but tonight it felt like the lair of a predator. Marco's men had given her a few minutes to freshen up after arriving, then escorted her here. Now it was just her and the wounded Mafia boss, finally face to face. Marco rested in a high-backed chair opposite her, his posture relaxed yet attentive. A faint wince crossed his features as he adjusted the arm that held his cane. Elena's eyes flicked to the bandage visible above his collar where a bullet had torn through him days ago. It seemed almost impossible that this well-groomed, Composed man was the same blood-soaked stranger she'd saved in a garage. He caught her looking and offered a small, almost self-conscious smile. "It's healing well, thanks to you." His deep voice was softer now than it had been outside, carrying a sincerity that took Elena aback. Unsure how to respond, she merely clasped her hands in her lap. "I did what anyone would have done," she murmured. Marco's dark eyebrows arched. Not anyone. In fact, very few would have risked helping a stranger bleeding, out in the dark. He leaned forward slightly, his gaze fixed on her. "You saved my life, Elena. For that, I am in your debt." Elena's heart pounded in her chest. The way he said her name, like it was something precious, unnerved her. She didn't want this man indebted to her. She wanted him to let her go. She cleared her throat, summoning courage. "If you truly feel that way, then please, let me return home. You don't owe me anything. I won't tell anyone about any of this." Marco's expression gentled, but there was a firmness beneath it. "I wish it were that simple. Unfortunately, things have become complicated." He gestured to a silver tea set that had been placed on the table between them. Elena hadn't touched the cup poured for her, but Marco lifted his and took a slow sip before continuing. "The men who tried to kill me are still out there. They might have seen you, or at the very least they know someone intervened. If word gets around that an innocent bystander helped Marco DeLuca, they could perceive you as a loose end or a potential weakness to exploit." Elena's mouth went dry. "Exploit? You mean they might come after me?" His jaw tightened. "I won't lie to you. Yes, there is such a risk. My world can be ruthless. If my enemies learn about you, they could target you to get to me." Elena's head spun. She had feared as much, but hearing him confirm it sent a bolt of terror through her. I have a family, a younger brother. I can't put him in danger, and that is precisely why you're here." Marco interjected, his tone calm but resolute. "I can protect you both here. My home is heavily guarded, and my people are the best. No one will harm you or Nico as long as you're under my protection." Elena inhaled sharply at the mention of Nico. It was one thing for his henchman to drop her brother's name. Hearing it from Marco himself was somehow even more jarring. He'd done his research. "How do you know about my brother?" she asked quietly. Marco gave a slight shrug, as if the answer were obvious. "When someone of my position is saved by a stranger, I make it my business to learn everything about them." He set his teacup down. "You're a final-year PA student and clinic intern. Top of your class. Parents deceased. Guardian to your 16-year-old brother," he continued evenly. "In short, Elena, I know who you are. And now you know exactly who I am." Elena felt exposed, anger pricking through her fear. "You had no right to dig into my life," she said. Hands gripping her knees to hide their shaking, Marco sighed. "Perhaps not, but I had to be sure you weren't a threat." He tilted his head. "You must have realized by now who I am. You heard my men call me by name. Surely you've connected the dots." She had, of course, but hearing him spell it out was different. Elena swallowed. Marco DeLuca, the DeLuca family, the Mafia. Saying it aloud felt surreal. He didn't flinch. "I prefer to call it an organization. But yes, I am the head of the DeLuca family, which makes me a very dangerous man to know." Silence hung between them. The fire crackled, and somewhere in the house a clock chimed the hour. Elena felt a chill despite the warmth of the hearth. How was this her life now? Days ago she was worrying about exams and overtime. Now she was sitting across from a notorious Mafia boss who spoke about protecting her from enemies like it was the most natural thing in the world. Marco broke the silence first. "I understand how overwhelming this is. You didn't ask for any of it. You were simply in the wrong place at the right time, so to speak." He gave a small, rueful smile. Elena mustered a glare. "Please, I just want to go home." Her voice trembled on the last word. Marco's eyes softened. "In time you will. But I have a proposition for you." She said nothing, bracing herself. "Stay here as my personal guest for a few weeks until I'm fully recovered and my men eliminate the remaining threat. During that time, you can help look after my injury, given your medical expertise. In return, I will compensate you generously."
"More money than you've likely ever seen." Elena blinked.
The offer was staggering and strange all at once. "You want to hire me as a private nurse?" Marco chuckled softly. "In a manner of speaking, yes. Think of it as repaying my debt to you. I get the benefit of your skilled care as I recuperate. And you get financial security. And not to be overlooked, you and your brother get round-the-clock protection. Until my enemies are dealt with. It was both tempting and horrifying. Elena could practically see Mia's face in her head, shouting, "Are you crazy?" Even considering staying here in the belly of the beast went against every instinct. But what choice did she really have? If Marco was right about the danger, and she sensed he was, leaving now could put her and Nico in the crosshairs. At least if she remained, Nico would be watched over by Marco's people. Still, she had to try to negotiate her own terms. "How do I know you'll actually let me go after these few weeks?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper. Something flickered in Marco's gaze, an emotion Elena couldn't read. He rose slowly to his feet, leaning on his cane as he did. Even wounded, he radiated authority. He walked to the fireplace, staring into the flames as he spoke. "I suppose you don't know that. You have only my word." He glanced back at her. "I do keep my word, Elena." She stood as well, unable to remain seated while he towered over her. "Forgive me if I'm having trouble trusting a criminal," she said, the word tasting bitter. Marco's lips thinned, but he inclined his head. "I understand. Trust will take time. That's another reason. I want you here to prove to you that you are safe with me." Safe. Elena looked around the sumptuous study, at the guards faintly visible through the doorway. She felt anything but safe. Yet she also sensed that Marco was being genuine, within his own warped code of honor, perhaps. Her silence was answer enough. Marco stepped closer, stopping a respectful arm's length away. "Will you stay? Just until the danger passes. I promise you and your brother will want for nothing. And when it's over, if you wish to leave, I won't stand in your way." Elena searched his face. Those dark eyes that had been wild with pain in the garage were clear now, fixed steadily on hers. Despite everything, the insanity of this situation, her lingering fear, she detected no deceit there. Perhaps it was naive, but she felt he meant it, at least right now. She closed her eyes, a tear slipping down her cheek before she could stop it. Her life was no longer her own. She was cornered. "Okay," she whispered. "I'll stay. For now." Marco released a breath as if he'd been holding it. Relief crossed his face. Gently, he reached out and brushed away that lone tear on Elena's cheek with his thumb. The gesture was startlingly tender, sending a confusing rush through her. "Thank you," he said softly. "You're doing the right thing." A sudden subtle beep sounded from a security panel on the wall, drawing Marco's attention. He lowered his hand and gave a slight nod. "I'll have a room prepared for you. Please, make yourself as comfortable as you can. We'll talk more in the morning." Elena nodded numbly. She felt wrung out, barely able to process what she'd just agreed to. Marco gestured to one of his men at the door, and immediately, a young woman in a maid's uniform appeared to escort Elena to a guest suite. As Elena followed, she cast one last glance back at Marco. He was watching her depart, a conflicted look on his face before he turned away to speak in low tones with Stefano, who had appeared at the study door. Unbeknownst to Elena, another set of eyes had observed much of the exchange from the security feed. In a monitoring room down the hall, Matteo De Luca stood before a bank of screens, one of which showed a silent, black and white view of Marco's study. Matteo's jaw tightened as he watched his brother gently wipe a tear from Elena's face on the replay. A spark of irritation, or was it jealousy, flashed in Matteo's eyes. He tapped a finger thoughtfully against his chin, then shut off the feed. As the screen went dark, he was already calculating his next move. Over the next several days, Elena settled into an uneasy routine under Marco's roof. True to his word, he treated her more like an honored guest than a prisoner. She was given a luxurious suite of rooms, fresh clothes, and anything she asked for. A discreet driver even delivered her car to the estate. And Marco assured her that Nico was being quietly guarded from afar. Yet despite the gilded hospitality, Elena never forgot she was here against her will. Every ornate hallway was patrolled by armed men. Every door she passed reminded her there was no easy way out. She saw Marco regularly, usually in the late mornings when she changed his bandages and checked his healing wound. Those interactions were polite, even warm at times. Marco would ask about her day, her studies, and he listened intently whenever she spoke, as if genuinely interested in the small details of her life. It was disarming to see this softer side of him, so different from the ruthless crime boss she knew he could be, but reminders of his violent world were never far. One afternoon, Elena was returning from the library room where she'd been allowed to study when raised voices echoed down a side corridor. Curiosity got the better of her, and she peeked into a half-open door to see Marco standing with a few of his men. On the floor knelt a bruised, trembling henchman, babbling in Italian. "You think begging forgives betrayal?" Marco's voice was dangerously quiet. Elena froze as she watched him circle the cowering man. Without warning, Marco lashed out with his cane, the heavy silver handle cracking across the man's face. The henchman yelped and crumpled. Elena clapped a hand over her mouth to stifle a gasp. Marco loomed over the man. "You fail me again. It won't be just a broken jaw." "Understood?" he hissed. The man fervently nodded, blood dripping from his lip. Marco turned on his heel, disgust evident on his face, and strode out of the room, directly toward the doorway where Elena stood hidden. Her heart seized. She stumbled back and hurried away before he could catch her spying. But she'd seen enough. Her hands were shaking. The brutality she'd just witnessed clashed horribly with the image of the considerate man who thanked her over breakfast for her help. It was a stark reminder. Marco DeLuca was dangerous. That night, a storm swept in. Rain lashed the windows of Elena's suite in steady drumming waves. She lay in bed, fully dressed, mind racing. Sleep wouldn't come. Not after what she'd seen. Fear had been building in her with each passing day in this mansion, and now it swelled to a breaking point. She had to get out before it was too late. Slipping on sneakers and a hoodie, Elena quietly opened the French doors that led from her room to a terrace. A gust of cool, wet wind blew in, spraying her face with rain. She stepped out, skin prickling with adrenaline. Below the terrace, the gardens stretched out, and beyond them the tall iron gates of the estate. Freedom was out there, if she could just reach it. Elena climbed down the trellis outside her balcony, the metal cold and slick under her fingers. Thunder rumbled overhead. She dropped onto the drenched lawn, heart hammering. Keeping to shadows, she darted from one hedgerow to the next, heading for the side of the property where she remembered seeing a service gate. Mud soaked through her shoes as she ran. The gate was just a dozen yards ahead now through the downpour. Lightning flashed, illuminating two silhouettes by the fence. Guards. They hadn't spotted her yet, but they stood between her and escape. Elena's breaths came in ragged bursts. Maybe she could slip past while their backs were turned. A beam of flashlight cut through the rain, sweeping the area. "Hey!" a voice shouted. The light caught Elena full on. In her panic, she'd moved too openly. The guard sprinted toward her and Elena bolted. She made it to the gate and tugged desperately at the latch, but it was locked tight. Strong arms seized her from behind. Elena screamed, kicking out. One guard pinned her wrists while the other loomed over her, breathing hard. "Stupid girl," he snarled. "Thought you could just run?" "Let me go," Elena cried, fighting even though she knew it was useless. Rain streamed down her face, mingling with hot tears of frustration. Amid the struggle, a commanding voice cut through the storm. "Stop. Now." Both guards instantly released Elena and stepped back, their grips replaced by the cold emptiness of the rain. Elena whirled around to see Marco standing a few paces away on the garden path. Drenched and furious, Matteo hovered just behind him under an umbrella, his face shadowed. Elena's chest constricted. She had never seen Marco look so cold. Thunder boomed as he approached, limping slightly on his healing leg. "Inside," he ordered the guards curtly. "I'll handle this." The men exchanged uncertain glances but obeyed, trudging off toward the mansion. Now only Marco and Matteo stood between Elena and the locked gate. Lightning flickered, highlighting the grim set of Marco's jaw. Elena trembled, rain plastering her hair to her face. She half expected Marco to explode in anger. Instead, he simply said her name, low and strained. "Elena." She took a step back, pressing against the unyielding iron bars behind her. "I can't stay here," she choked out. "I can't, please." Her voice broke on a sob. For a long moment, Marco was silent. Water dripped from his hair and soaked shirt. The rage in his eyes slowly faded into something that looked like regret. Matteo's voice suddenly sliced through the quiet. "She should be punished for this." "Brother," he said tightly, glaring at Elena. "She could have been taken by our enemies out there." She endangered herself, and by extension, all of us. Elena flinched at his harsh tone. Marco held up a hand, silencing Matteo's admonishment. Go back inside. Matteo? Now. His words left no room for argument. Matteo hesitated, jaw clenched, but then nodded curtly and stalked away, splashing through puddles as he departed. Marco stepped closer to Elena. She pressed back against the gate, fresh sobs shaking her. To her surprise, Marco slowly reached out and rested a hand on her shoulder, a touch that was gentle despite the tension in his frame. Elena, he said, almost inaudible beneath the rain's roar. Do you have any idea what could have happened if you got out? The people who tried to kill me, they would find you. They'd use you. I'm trying to keep you safe. His voice sounded more hurt than angry. She met his gaze, tears blurring her vision. I feel like a prisoner, she whispered. I am a prisoner. Marco closed his eyes for a second, rainwater running down his face. I know, he said quietly. I'm sorry, Elena's breath caught. She hadn't expected an apology. Marco opened his eyes and they were filled with a sorrowful earnestness. I never wanted to make you feel trapped. But if something happened to you, I wouldn't forgive myself. Elena's resolve crumpled. The fight drained out of her, leaving only exhaustion and despair. She sank to her knees in the mud, sobbing openly now as the storm raged around them. All the terror, the grief of her stolen normal life poured out in those tears. Marco knelt slowly in front of her, disregarding the mud that stained his expensive trousers. He hesitated, then wrapped an arm around Elena's shaking shoulders and drew her in against him. She was too tired to resist. There, in the freezing rain, the Mafia boss held her as she cried. He said nothing, letting her sob into his soaked shirt, one hand cradling the back of her head in a strangely protective gesture. When Elena's sobs finally subsided into ragged sniffles, Marco helped her gently to her feet. They were both shivering, the adrenaline of the moment ebbing and leaving cold reality. Without a word, Marco guided her back toward the mansion. Elena stumbled at his side, drained. As they passed under the portico, she realized Marco was still gripping her hand firmly, as if afraid she might slip away if he let go. He paused at the threshold, looking down at her with an unreadable expression. No more escape attempts, he said hoarsely. It was not a threat, but a plea. Elena lowered her eyes, nodding faintly. In that moment, she felt more confusion than anger. Marco's actions baffled her. Violent one moment, gentle the next. But as much as she hated to admit it, in his arms she had felt safe. Safer, perhaps, than out in the world with unknown enemies hunting her. She hated that realization. Marco released her hand, and servants rushed forward with towels and concerned faces. He addressed them sharply. See that she's taken care of. Only then did he step back, allowing them to wrap Elena in warmth. As they led her inside, Elena glanced over her shoulder. Marco remained in the open doorway, rainwater pooling at his feet, watching her with an expression that looked very much like heartache. That night, alone in her room after being dried off and given warm clothes, Elena curled up under the blankets and cried anew, quiet, exhausted tears. She cried for her lost freedom, for the terrifying world she'd been thrust into, and perhaps also for the tortured man at the center of it. In a smoky back room of a derelict warehouse across town, a group of men gathered around a makeshift table littered with maps and guns. These were members of the rival Bruno crime family, Marco's bitter enemies. Their leader, a scar-faced man named Salvatore Bruno, tapped a finger on a city map spread before them. De Luca's been holed up at his estate since our little surprise, Salvatore growled. He's wounded and hiding behind his walls. We need a way to draw him out. We could hit one of his businesses again, offered one of his lieutenants. Finish what we started. Salvatore shook his head. We've tried that. He only tightens security. No, we need leverage, something he won't ignore. His cold eyes glinted as he leaned over the table. We hit him where it hurts. As if on cue, a new voice spoke from the shadows near the door. You mean the girl, Alder. Heads turned as a figure stepped forward from the darkened corner. He was a slim man in an expensive suit, an outsider in this grimy room. The light from a dangling bulb revealed a familiar face. Matteo De Luca. Several of Salvatore's men reached for their weapons, but Salvatore lifted a hand. Relax, he sneered. This one's our ally. For now. He eyed Matteo with a mix of curiosity and contempt. So, The prodigal brother returns. I assume you have information for me? Matteo smirked, though tension lined his posture. Coming here was a risk, but in his mind a necessary one. My brother has a weakness under his roof, Matteo said coolly. The woman who saved him, Elena, he's grown attached. Spat the last word as if it were a curse. If she were to be taken, Marco would do anything to get her back. A cruel grin spread on Salvatore's face. So it's true. Marco's got himself a little pet. He laughed, a harsh sound. I never thought I'd see the day. Marco De Luca beholden to some girl. Matteo's jaw tightened. He despised the thought as well. He's not thinking clearly. All his focus is on protecting her. It's clouding his judgment. Matteo neglected to mention his own motives, the simmering resentment that his brother might place more trust in this stranger than in his own blood. Then we'll use it, Salvatore said, rolling up the map. We grab the girl, draw him out. And when he comes... Salvatore tapped the pistol at his hip, leaving the rest unsaid. One of the lieutenants frowned warily at Matteo. What's stopping your brother from finding out you helped set this up? Matteo flashed a humorless smile. Leave Marco to me. I'll ensure he doesn't see it coming. Just be ready. I can slip you information on his security details shift changes. But the window will be small. Salvatore stepped forward and extended a hand, which Matteo clasped in a quick perfunctory shake. It was an alliance forged in mutual hate for Marco. We snatch her at the next opportunity. The sooner the better, Salvatore said. Our men will be ready. Matteo gave a curt nod. I'll send a signal when it's time. Do not harm her unless absolutely necessary. She's valuable alive. He tried to sound indifferent, but something in his tone wavered. He pushed it aside. As Matteo turned to go, Salvatore called after him. You deliver this to Luca, and maybe we can talk about that other thing you want. Matteo paused at the door, not bothering to face the gangster fully. Just hold up your end. I'll hold up mine. Without another word, he disappeared into the night, leaving the Bruno men to finalize their preparations. As the group began arming themselves and reviewing the estate layout, Salvatore Bruno allowed himself a vicious smile. The trap was set. Soon Marco De Luca would learn that even the mighty have vulnerabilities, and that the Bruno family was ready to exploit every single one. Lightning flashed outside the grime-coated window as the men readied their guns. The question hanging unsaid in the stale air was not if they would strike, but how soon. A week later, Elena was granted a small taste of freedom, or so it seemed. Marco had noticed her growing despondent and, in an effort to ease her spirits, agreed to let her venture outside the estate for a short outing under heavy guard. Elena chose to visit a bustling open-air market in the city, partly to feel normal again and partly with a tiny hope that she might spot an opening to escape for good. Late on a sunny morning, Elena found herself strolling through the market's colorful stalls with two of Marco's men flanking her. Victor, the sandy-haired man who had first taken her, walked a few paces behind, his sharp gaze scanning every passerby. Another bodyguard, a burly fellow named Enzo, stuck close at her side. Despite their efforts to appear inconspicuous in casual clothes, they were unmistakable as sentinels to her. Elena paused at a fruit stand, inhaling the scent of fresh oranges and strawberries. For a moment, she could almost pretend she was just an ordinary woman out shopping, not a watched captive. Enzo stepped forward to pay the vendor for the small basket of berries. She'd picked out a kindness, or perhaps an excuse to keep his body between her and the crowd. As she waited, Elena's eyes drifted to a mother and child laughing together by a flower stall. A pang of longing shot through her. How she wished she could call Nico, hear his voice, assure him she was okay. Her guards had confiscated her phone for this trip, citing security. Suddenly, a commotion erupted at the far end of the market. Shouts rang out as two shoppers began arguing loudly. The disturbance drew everyone's attention, including Victor's and Enzo's. They exchanged wary glances, momentarily more focused on assessing the threat from the shouting men than on Elena. In that split second, Elena felt a rough hand clamp over her mouth from behind. Her scream was smothered as an arm locked around her waist like a vice. She was yanked backward with such force her feet left the ground. The basket of berries tumbled from her hands, strawberries scattering across the pavement. Victor spun around at the noise, eyes widening. "Elena!" he shouted, reaching under his jacket for his gun. But in the same instant, a black van screeched up alongside the curb, side door sliding open. A large man in a ski mask hauled Elena toward the van. She kicked and thrashed, managing to drive her heel hard into her captor's shin. He grunted but didn't loosen his hold. Before Victor or Enzo could intervene, another masked assailant leveled a pistol and fired. Bang! Enzo cried out and collapsed, clutching his leg. The crowd scattered in panic, screams rippling through the market as people fled for cover. Victor ducked behind a vendor cart, drawing his weapon and returning fire with 2 precise shots. One masked man fell with a howl, gripping his shoulder. In the chaos, the brute holding Elena shoved her through the van's open door. She landed hard on the metal floor, pain jolting through her elbows. Before she could scramble out, the injured man and the shooter leapt in after her. The door slammed shut. Tires squealed. Elena's world lurched as the van sped away from the market. She crawled up, banging on the walls. "Let me go," she yelled, voice raw with terror. A hand fisted in her hair, dragging her away from the door. "Shut up," snarled the uninjured kidnapper. Ripping the mask from his face to suck in air, Elena found herself staring at Salvatore. Bruno, a face she recognized from news, reports about organized crime in the city. He slapped duct tape roughly over her mouth, silencing her screams. Through the back window of the van, Elena caught a glimpse of Victor sprinting into a car to pursue them, but the van wove recklessly through traffic, breaking line of sight. Her heart thundered in her chest. She'd been taken, just like Marco feared. The van raced to an industrial part of town and jerked to a stop inside an abandoned loading dock. Elena was yanked out and dragged into a cavernous, dimly lit warehouse. The smell of rust and oil filled her nose as Salvatore's men tied her to a chair. Her wrists were bound with coarse rope and muffled. Pleas died behind the tape over her mouth. Salvatore loomed before her, his scarred face twisted in a triumphant sneer. "Marco will come for you," he said, almost gleeful. "Exactly what we want." Elena's stomach churned. They were using her as bait. One of the Bruno lieutenants rushed over. "Boss, we gotta hurry. DeLuca's people will track that van." Salvatore waved a hand. "Let them." "Is everything set?" "In position," the man confirmed. "Guns ready, exits covered." Elena's eyes darted around wildly. There were at least 8 armed brutes visible in the shadows of the warehouse. 8 men waiting to ambush Marco. Her blood ran cold. She fought against her bonds uselessly. The rope dug into her skin. Tears of frustration welled in her eyes. She wanted to warn Marco somehow not to come, that it was a trap. But it was far too late for that. Tires screeched outside. A heartbeat later, gunfire erupted as Marco's convoy of vehicles barreled into the warehouse entrance. The Bruno men opened fire immediately, muzzle flashes strobing the darkness. Bullets pinged off metal beams. Elena cowered, tipping her chair. Onto its side behind a stack of crates just as stray bullets riddled the spot where she'd been sitting. The warehouse echoed with deafening blasts. Over the cacophony, she heard a familiar voice roaring orders. "Marco." Moments later, a dark figure sprinted through the crossfire toward her. Stefano, Marco's lieutenant. He skidded to his knees at her side. "Hang on, signorina," he shouted over the din, cutting the ropes binding her wrists with a knife. Elena gasped as the tape was peeled from her mouth. Before she could speak, a Bruno thug charged from the shadows behind Stefano, raising a rifle. Elena's eyes widened. "Look out!" she screamed. Stefano whirled and fired his pistol point blank. The gunman dropped. Stefano hauled Elena to her feet. "Stay down and follow me," he commanded. Keeping low, Elena stumbled behind him, weaving between pallets and machinery. All around, Marco's men and Bruno's crew traded fire. One of Marco's bodyguards fell with a shout not far away. Within minutes, Marco and his men had overwhelmed the remaining Bruno gang. Salvatore himself fell in the firefight, cut down by Marco's furious onslaught. The battle ended as quickly as it began, leaving the warehouse echoing with silence. Breathing hard, Marco turned to Elena, hands shaking as he grabbed her shoulders. "Are you hurt?" His voice was ragged with concern. Elena, stunned by everything, managed to shake her head. Marco pulled her into a fierce embrace, as if to assure himself she was truly there and safe. She clung to him, relief and shock crashing through her in equal measure. Stefano approached, blood spattered on his sleeve. "Boss, we got them. All of them," he reported, surveying the bodies strewn about. Several of Marco's men were tending to their own wounded, but the Bruno family lieutenants lay dead or dying, including Salvatore. Marco nodded, his arm still, protectively around Elena. His face darkened, as his gaze fell on one of his own. Victor, slumped against a pillar, a bullet hole in his chest. Victor had chased the van and alerted the crew, but paid the ultimate price. Marco's eyes then tracked to Enzo, alive but hurt, being helped in by late arriving backup. Stefano followed his boss's line of sight. Quietly, he said, "We found a burner phone on one of Bruno's men, with messages from someone inside our circle. The leak. It was Enzo." At that, Enzo, the burly guard who had accompanied, Elena stiffened in the arms of the men supporting him. "No, boss, I swear," he began, eyes wide with panic. Marco's expression turned ice cold. He gently unwound himself from Elena and strode toward the injured guard. Enzo's protests morphed into pleas as Marco took a pistol from Stefano. Please, it wasn't personal. They paid me," Enzo stammered. A single gunshot rang out. Elena jumped, a scream catching in her throat. Marco lowered the smoking pistol as Enzo crumpled lifelessly. The echo of the execution hung in the air. Marco handed the gun back to Stefano without a word, his face a stony mask. Elena stared, heart-pounding wildly. She understood Enzo had betrayed them, betrayed her, but seeing Marco kill one of his own so swiftly, so remorselessly, turned her blood to ice. A sob of fear escaped her lips before she could stop it. Marco heard it. His hardened expression flickered when he looked back at Elena and saw the fear in her eyes. Blood spattered, wounded in one arm, and radiating lethal authority, he cut a fearsome figure. Elena shrank back instinctively, trembling. Marco stepped toward her, his eyes softening. "Elena," he began, voice heavy with regret. She flinched and he halted, anguish crossing his features. He realized what she had seen, what he had just shown her of himself. Drawing a shuddering breath, Marco ran a hand over his face, smearing a streak of someone else's blood across his brow. He turned to Stefano. "Get everyone out of here. Clean this up." His tone was flat. Stefano nodded and began barking orders to the remaining men. Marco approached Elena again, slowly this time, as one might approach a skittish animal. "It's over," he said quietly. Rain began pattering on the broken warehouse roof as dark clouds rolled in overhead. "You're safe now." Elena's eyes brimmed with tears. Safe. The word felt almost absurd, amid the carnage surrounding them. She wasn't sure she'd ever feel truly safe again. Marco carefully reached out and placed a hand on her back, guiding her away from the scene. She was too numb to resist. As he led her toward the exit where his car waited, he leaned down and whispered near her ear, with a mixture of relief and fierce possessiveness. "You're never walking away from me now." Those words, and the desperate conviction behind them, sent a complicated chill through Elena, part comfort, part dread. In that moment she knew, whatever thin line had existed between her, freedom and Marco's world had been shattered completely. Hours later, back at the estate, Elena sat curled in a corner of Marco's expansive library, a heavy silence between them. The drive home had been tense. Marco had tried to offer comfort, but Elena remained withdrawn, replaying the day's horrors over and over. Now, freshly showered and dressed in clean clothes, she felt marginally more human, but her soul felt bruised. Marco stood a few feet away, his injured arm freshly bandaged. He had changed out of his blood-stained clothes, though the haunted look in his eyes remained. He watched Elena carefully, as if afraid she might shatter. Finally, Elena mustered the strength to speak the question burning inside her. "Did you have to kill him?" Her voice was barely above a whisper, but it sliced through the quiet room. Marco's shoulders tensed. "Enzo made his choice," he said after a moment, tone measured. Elena's eyes flashed as she lifted her gaze to his. "He was on his knees, Marco. Your own man. And you—" Her throat tightened. "You shot him like he was nothing." Marco closed his eyes, a pained expression twisting his features. "If I hadn't, others would question my judgment. My enemies would smell weakness. So it was a show then?" Elena spat, bitterness on her tongue. "A performance of the big bad Mafia boss?" His eyes snapped open, anger and hurt warring in them. It was justice. His betrayal got people killed today. Nearly got you killed. Marco took a step closer, his voice cracking. "I warned him what would happen if anyone harmed you. He knew the price." Elena stood abruptly, the chair scraping. "Do you even hear yourself? This life of yours. It's insanity. Violence answering violence. Endless revenge." She pressed a hand to her forehead, trying to steady her spinning thoughts. "How can you expect me to ever feel safe with you after what I saw?" Her words hung in the air. Marco looked as though she'd slapped him. He turned away, running a hand along the spines of books on a shelf, struggling for composure. "I never wanted you to see that side of things," he said quietly. "I wanted to keep you away from it." A humorless laugh escaped him. "I suppose I failed rather spectacularly." Elena watched the powerful man before, her sag under an invisible weight. In the firelight, he suddenly looked far older than his 30-odd years. "Why, Marco?" she asked softly. "Why are you this?" He glanced at her, brow furrowed. She stepped closer despite herself, searching his face. "You talk about protecting and debts and enemies, but what made you think you have to live like this? What happened to you?" Marco's jaw worked. For a long moment she thought he wouldn't answer, but then he inhaled deeply, as if drawing courage, and spoke. "Our father happened." Elena stayed silent, letting him continue. Marco stared into the middle distance, eyes hard. "My father was boss before me. He was cruel to us, to me and Matteo, and to our mother. But worse, he was stupid. He made mistakes that cost our family dearly." Marco's voice turned acidic with old resentment. His enemies saw an opening. "They came for us one night to settle scores. I was 12. Elena's heart clenched. She could picture a boy with Marco's dark eyes, terrified. "What happened?" she whispered. Marco's hand tightened around the back of a chair until his knuckles went white. "They broke in during dinner. There was gunfire, chaos. Matteo and I hid under the table. When it was over, my father was bleeding out and our mother..." His voice caught. "Our mother was dead." Elena covered her mouth, tears gathering in her eyes. "Marco, I'm so sorry." He let out a shuddering breath. "My father survived, but he was never the same. He withered away, a broken man. I took over the family business young, determined never to repeat his mistakes. I swore no one would ever hurt the people under my protection again, and I swore I'd never be weak like him." A tear slipped down Elena's cheek. At last, she was glimpsing the wounded soul beneath Marco's armor. "That's why you do what you do," she said, understanding dawning. "Why you reacted so strongly when I tried to leave. Why you're so obsessed with keeping control." He nodded slowly, eyes gleaming with unshed tears of his own. "Losing my mother nearly destroyed me. I cannot, will not lose someone I care about again because I was careless or too soft to act." His gaze found Elena's, raw and open. "Don't you see? When I saw them take you today, I've never felt fear like that. I would have burned the entire city to get you back." Elena's breath hitched. He cared about her, more than she had realized. The depth of emotion in his eyes told her that saving his life had forged a bond he wouldn't let break. "I understand wanting to protect people you love," Elena said quietly. "After our parents died, not violently, but a car accident, I had to take care of Nico. He was only 10. I was barely an adult myself. But I promised myself I'd never let anything happen to him. He's my world." Marco stepped closer, and this time Elena didn't back away. Gently, he wiped the tear from her cheek with the pat of his thumb, just as he had the night she agreed to stay. "You carry a lot on your shoulders," he murmured. "You're strong, Elena. Stronger than most people I know." She gave a tremulous smile. "I'm not sure about that. Today I felt pretty terrified." "Yet you fought," Marco pointed out. "You saved me in that garage. You elbowed Salvatore and gave me the chance to end him. You have courage that amazes me." Elena's cheeks warmed at the praise, and she lowered her head. Carefully, Marco tilted her chin back up, forcing her to meet his eyes. "I mean it," he said. "You are remarkable, and I'm truly sorry for all the pain I've caused you." In the quiet hush of the library, Elena felt something shift between them. Compassion and understanding, born from shared vulnerability, flowed freely now. She could see the tortured boy behind Marco's stern exterior, and he could see the determined woman beneath her fear. Without thinking, Elena raised a hand and rested it against Marco's chest, right above his heart. She felt it thudding steadily beneath her palm. "I don't know what happens next," she whispered. "This world of yours still scares me, but thank you for telling me the truth." Marco covered her hand with his own, his warmth easing some of the chill that had burrowed in her. "Whatever happens next," he said softly, "I want you to know I will do everything in my power to keep you safe and make this right." Elena believed he meant it in his own way, He was trying so hard to do right by her. She managed a small nod. I know. They stood there in a fragile moment of peace, each drawing comfort from the other's presence. Marco's thumb gently stroked the back of Elena's hand. For the first time since this nightmare began, she felt not like a prisoner, but like someone truly seen and cared for. Unbeknownst to them both, a pair of eyes watched from just beyond the library doorway. Matteo lingered in the shadows, having witnessed enough to tighten his gut with anxiety. The closeness he saw between his brother and Elena was dangerous, at least to Matteo's ambitions. Marco's guard was lowering, his priorities shifting, all because of this woman. Matteo could not allow it. Silently, he slipped away down the hall, pulling out a burner phone. He tapped out a brief message composed of seemingly innocuous words, a coded signal that only its recipient would understand. Tonight, the devil falls. Message sent. Matteo deleted the text and steeled himself. If his plan succeeded, by sunrise, Marco would no longer be in charge of the De Luca family, and Elena would cease to be a problem once and for all. True to his word, Marco began arranging for Elena's release once Salvatore Bruno was eliminated. He knew the honorable thing was to let her return to a normal life. So on the eve of her planned departure, Marco insisted on personally driving Elena and Nico to a secure location where they could resume their lives under the radar. Close to midnight, Elena found herself in the passenger seat of Marco's Black, sedan as it wound through city streets. In the back seat, Nico sat wide-eyed and nervous. Marco had fetched him from home earlier that evening as a surprise reunion, assuring both siblings that tonight Elena would finally come home. Elena could hardly believe this was happening. Her heart fluttered with a mixture of hope and sadness. She had grown to see Marco in a very different light. Yet the idea of freedom, of Nico safe at her side, was a relief beyond measure. Marco drove calmly, offering a faint smile whenever their eyes met. Matteo followed behind in a separate car with a few bodyguards, ostensibly serving as additional security escort. As they neared an intersection downtown, Marco's phone buzzed. He glanced at the text and frowned. Roadblock ahead. Matteo says to detour through the parking garage up on 8th, he murmured. Indeed, just visible in the distance were flashing police lights and barricades. Marco turned into the entrance of a familiar, multi-level parking structure, the very one where Elena had first found him. The ramps were mostly empty at this late hour. Their headlights cast long shadows on concrete as they ascended to the second level. Behind them, Matteo's car followed close. Suddenly, the beam of Marco's headlights illuminated a figure standing in the middle of the lane. Marco cursed and slammed the brakes. Crack. A gunshot rang out, shattering the windshield. Marco jerked back, a burst of red blooming on his shoulder. "Get down!" he shouted. Elena cried out, throwing herself over Nico in the back seat as another shot spiderwebbed the side window. The figure in the lane, one of Bruno's remaining gunmen, darted aside as two SUVs screeched in behind Matteo's car, effectively boxing them in. It was an ambush. Marco floored the accelerator, swerving around a column. His injured arm made steering clumsy. Blood soaked his sleeve. The sedan lurched and crashed into a parked car, grinding to a halt. Dazed from the impact, Elena lifted her head. "Marco!" she gasped. He was slumped over the wheel, teeth gritted in pain. Tires screeched as Matteo's vehicle and the SUVs disgorged armed men. Muzzle flashes lit up the garage as a firefight erupted between Marco's bodyguards and the attackers. Bullets pinged off concrete and metal. Nico was whimpering in terror. Elena pushed the passenger door open. "Nico, crawl out my side," she yelled over the din. He obeyed, and Elena dragged her bleeding brother behind a low wall for cover. A quick glance told her the wound was a graze on his arm. Painful but not life-threatening. Heart hammering, Elena dashed back to the driver's side. She yanked the door open and managed to haul a groaning Marco out just as bullets thudded into the car's hood. Marco tried to stand, but his knees buckled. A crimson stain spread across his shirt near the previous injury. He'd been shot, near his bandaged wound. Elena wrapped her arm around his waist, half carrying, half dragging him behind a concrete pillar. He gasped, one hand pressed to his bleeding side. Around them, chaos raged. She saw two of Marco's men go down under enemy fire, and Matteo's voice rang out, startling her. "Marco De Luca!" Matteo's shout echoed. "Throw down your weapons! It's over!" Elena peered around the pillar in disbelief. Matteo stood flanked by Bruno gunmen, a pistol in his hand. His face was contorted with what looked like triumph and anguish all at once. Only 2 of Marco's bodyguards were still fighting, pinned down behind a concrete barrier. The rest lay motionless or were disarmed. Marco struggled to lift his head. "Matteo?" he rasped, eyes foggy with pain and confusion. Matteo stepped forward, sneering. "You never saw it coming, brother." He spat the last word. "All these years I stood in your shadow, and for what? So you could throw it all away over a woman?" Marco's face went pale. Whether from blood loss or the bitter realization of betrayal, Elena's blood ran cold. This wasn't just an ambush, it was a coup. And they were hopelessly outgunned. Marco tried to push himself upright, but collapsed with a groan, blood pooling under him. Matteo's men closed in, guns trained on Marco and Elena's meager cover. Nico, trembling behind the other wall, caught Elena's gaze with terrified eyes. She realized he was likely hidden from the attacker's view. If she could distract them, maybe Nico could crawl to safety. Elena's heart pounded. She turned her attention back to Marco. His breathing was shallow, eyes unfocused as he fought to stay conscious. Without hesitating, Elena tore off her light jacket and pressed it hard to his wound, trying to stanch the bleeding. "Elena, go," Marco coughed, blood flecking his lips. "Take Nico and run." "No," she cried fiercely, keeping pressure on his wound even as tears blurred her vision. A chorus of shouts echoed as Matteo's men ordered, the last of Marco's guards, to drop their weapons. The firefight was ending with Marco's side on the losing end. Bullets sparked off the pillar inches from her head, causing her to duck lower over Marco. He weakly tried to shove her away. "Please," he begged, voice breaking. "I can't lose you. Go." Elena looked toward the exit. If she ran now, she might make it out the side door in the confusion. She could escape with Nico. It was everything she thought she wanted. But she couldn't do it. She couldn't leave Marco here to die. Not after all they had been through. Not after seeing the desperation in his eyes now. "I won't leave you," she whispered. "I won't." Summoning every ounce of courage, Elena raised her head above the parapet of the pillar and screamed into the chaos. "He's bleeding out. He needs help!" Her voice cut through the din. For a split second, even Matteo hesitated. In that moment, Elena made her choice. She tore a strip from her jacket and bound it tight around Marco's torso as an improvised bandage, fully exposing herself to danger in the process. Gunshots whizzed past. One grazed her upper arm, burning hot, but she didn't flinch. Matteo's eyes narrowed at the sight of Elena protecting his brother. He barked new orders. "Take them alive." His men surged forward, Elena's frantic attempt to stop. Marco's bleeding under fire bought them only seconds. But sometimes seconds are everything. As Matteo's soldiers closed in, Elena prayed someone, anyone, was coming to their aid. Elena's shouted plea had bought a scant moment of confusion. She took advantage of it. Spotting a row of parked cars nearby, she snatched a loose piece of broken concrete and hurled it at a car's windshield. The glass cracked and the car alarm blared to life, its siren echoing shrill and loud through the garage. Several of Matteo's men flinched at the sudden noise, their aim faltering. In the chaos, Nico, still hiding behind the low wall, seized the chance to scramble away toward the garage ramp, out of the line of fire. Elena's heart soared with relief seeing him slip out. At least Nico might escape this nightmare. The piercing alarms triggered a chain reaction. Other cars' security systems began wailing in sympathy. The whole garage became a cacophony of flashing lights and deafening sirens. Marco, woozy but spurred by Elena's defiance, forced himself up to a knee. With trembling fingers, he retrieved a fallen pistol from the ground. Matteo's men were disoriented by the noise and lights, and in that split second, Marco took aim at the nearest attacker and fired. The man dropped. Pandemonium resumed. Matteo yelled, "Stop them!" and fired a shot that chipped the pillar by Marco's head as Marco ducked back. Stefano, bloodied but alive, emerged, limping from behind an overturned concrete barrier where he'd been knocked down. Seeing Matteo's crew advancing, he lifted an assault rifle from a fallen foe and unleashed a hail of cover fire that sent the traitors diving for cover of their own. "Boss, this way!" Stefano shouted hoarsely, gesturing toward a maintenance stairwell at the garage's edge. If they could regroup or escape that way, Elena slung Marco's arm over her shoulders, practically hauling him toward Stefano's position. Gunfire and alarms melded into one long nightmare of sound. They were so close to the stairwell door, just a few more yards. A furious roar stopped them in their tracks. Matteo, realizing his men were scattered, charged forward on his own. He threw down his empty pistol and tackled Marco before Stefano could react, driving him and Elena to the concrete floor. Elena cried out as she was flung aside, landing hard against a support column. Dizzy, she looked up to see the De Luca brothers grapple in a brutal melee. Matteo was uninjured and fueled by rage. Marco was weakened, but desperation lent him strength. They rolled on the ground, exchanging punches. "I looked up to you," Matteo snarled between blows. "And you chose her over family." Marco caught Matteo with an elbow to the jaw. "You were ready to sell our family out," he growled back. Matteo landed a knee into Marco's wounded side. Marco let out a choked groan, collapsing backward. Matteo wrenched a knife from his belt, eyes wild. "I'll do what I should have done years ago," he spat, raising the blade. Elena's scream tore through the garage. "No!" A gunshot answered, but not from Matteo. His body jolted, the knife clattering from his hand. He staggered, blood blossoming through his shirt. Behind him stood Stefano, pistol raised. His face was grim. Matteo coughed a wet, red cough and sank to his knees. He stared at his brother, lips moving in shock but no words coming out. Marco struggled up, clutching his side as Matteo keeled over onto the concrete. The younger De Luca's eyes fixed on the ceiling, empty and unblinking. A sudden stillness fell. The remaining traitorous gunmen, seeing their leader down, threw their weapons aside and bolted into the darkness of the lower levels. The fight was done. Marco swayed on his feet. Elena was at his side in an instant, guiding him gently to sit against the nearest pillar. The adrenaline that had kept him going was fading fast. He was bleeding heavily again. Stefano approached, leaving Matteo's body where it lay. "It's over, Marco," he panted, surveying the carnage. Marco's face was blank with exhaustion and sorrow as he nodded. His own brother's blood mingled with his on the concrete. There would be time for grief later, if he survived. Elena tore open Marco's shirt, her hands slick with blood. The old wound at his side had torn open, and a new bullet wound oozed just below it. She pressed her palms down, trying to stem the bleeding. Marco's head lolled back, eyes unfocused. "Stay with me, Marco," Elena pleaded, voice shaking. "Please, you have to stay awake." Marco's eyelids fluttered. He mustered a faint, wry smile even as he grimaced in pain. "Twice in one lifetime," he whispered. "That you're saving me in a parking garage. I must be very lucky." Elena choked out a tearful laugh despite herself. "Hush, save your strength." Sirens sounded in the distance. This time police. The earlier gunfire and chaos had finally drawn official attention. Stefano cursed under his breath. "Boss, we need to get you out of here. Now." Marco, however, seemed beyond caring about the approaching authorities. His gaze remained on Elena. Gently, he lifted a trembling hand to touch her cheek. "Elena," he murmured, each word costing effort. If you want to go, I'll let you. I promise." Tears spilled down Elena's face as she pressed harder on his wound. "Don't you dare talk like that. You'll tell me this when you're fine, do you hear me?" Her voice broke. The thought of walking away from him now, of losing him, cleaved her heart in two. Marco's hand fell away as he finally lost consciousness from blood loss. Elena panicked, checking his pulse. Faint but there. Stefano barked urgent orders. One of their remaining men pulled a car around, and together they lifted Marco's limp form into the back. Elena refused to leave his side, climbing in with him. As the car squealed out of the garage moments ahead of the arriving police cruisers, Elena cradled Marco's head in her lap, her hands still pressed to his wounds. She kept whispering to him, promises that he would be okay, that she wasn't going anywhere. The words were as much for herself as for him. Unanswered, her pleas hung in the air as the city lights streaked past. Elena held on and refused to let go. Dawn's early light found Elena standing at the grand wrought iron gates of the De Luca estate, a small duffel bag at her feet and Nico by her side. The morning air was crisp, carrying the chirp of waking birds. Beyond the gates stretched the outside world, a world Elena wasn't sure she knew how to re-enter after everything that had happened. Behind them, the mansion stood quiet, its stone facade gilded by the pale sunrise. Marco was still asleep inside, recovering from surgery. The family's private doctor had removed the bullets and declared he'd make it through. He needed rest, so Elena had slipped out while he remained unconscious, not wanting to face a goodbye. She had written a note, one stained with a few of her tears, thanking him for keeping his promise to let her go. Elena's heart felt like lead as she remembered the last sight of him before. She left his bedside, pale but alive, His strong features softened in sleep. She touched the bandage on her upper arm, where a grazing bullet wound had been dressed. A physical reminder that the danger had been real and might not be over. Nico gently nudged her. "Elle, you okay?" he asked quietly. Her brother's arm was in a sling from his minor injury, but otherwise he was all right. Elena had never been more grateful. She forced a smile for him. "Yeah, we can go home now." Home. The word felt strange. Could life really go back to normal? With a creak, the heavy gate unlocked and began to swing open. 2 of Marco's suited security men had opened it for them, under strict orders from their recovering boss not to hinder Elena's departure. They nodded respectfully as she and Nico stepped through. Elena paused outside the gate, her bag in hand. All it would take was a few steps, and she'd be free. Nico squeezed her hand encouragingly. She took a tentative step forward down the tree-lined road. The gate clanged shut behind them. Elena inhaled deeply, fighting the urge to sob. This was what she wanted, wasn't it? To be free of the violence and fear? To have Nico safe? And yet, each step away from the estate felt harder than the last. Memories flashed through her mind. Marco's gentle smile as he teased her over breakfast. The fierce way he'd shielded her with his own body. The broken look in his eyes when she had cried. Against all logic, she felt a hollowness opening in her chest the further she walked. They reached where the private drive met the main road. A black car was parked there, engine idling, ready to take Elena and Nico back to the city. One of Marco's men, familiar Paul, stood by the rear door, waiting to drive them wherever they wished. Elena realized then that though she was beyond the gates, she was not truly alone. The shadows under the oak trees shifted, revealing 2 more of Marco's men discreetly keeping pace a short distance behind. They were dressed casually, almost blending in, but she recognized them. They weren't trying to stop her, just watching, protecting. She bit her lip, a conflicted laugh escaping her. Of course. Even after letting her go, Marco was unwilling to leave her entirely unguarded. He would never really let her go, not completely. Elena wasn't sure how to feel about that. Relieved? Frustrated? Secretly comforted? Perhaps all 3 at once. Nico climbed into the car, urging her to follow. Elena lingered a moment, turning back to gaze at the distant silhouette of the mansion's roof peeking over the trees. Somewhere in there, Marco was likely awakening to find her gone, honoring the promise he'd made, at cost to his own heart. "Elena," Nico called gently from the car. "It's okay." Elena closed her eyes, drawing in one last breath of the cool morning air. She had survived a world she never imagined, loved a man she was supposed to fear, and changed in ways she hadn't yet begun to comprehend. The future was uncertain. As she slid into the car beside her brother and the door thumped shut, Elena couldn't help but wonder if her story with Marco was truly over, or merely a chapter waiting for a sequel. As the car pulled onto the road, her eyes caught a glimpse of a dark sedan in the rearview mirror, following at a respectful distance. A faint smile tugged at her lips, and a tear rolled down her cheek. She didn't know what lay ahead, for her, for Nico, or for the man she had saved in that parking lot. But she did know one thing with certainty. Their lives were forever entangled. And no matter how far she went, the shadow of the Mafia boss who would never let her go would always be near. In a downtown newsroom that morning, a headline was already being prepared. "Gangland upheaval, Mafia boss DeLuca survives." Internal coup. Elena didn't need to read it to feel the truth of it in her bones. A new storm was brewing, and she had barely stepped out of the last one. For now, however, as the city skyline came into view, Elena rested her head back and closed her eyes. Free or not, safe or not, she was heading home.